cat just keeps jumping in, you jumper. Hi, welcome to another episode of Ask a Brit. This is Lawrence Brown, and of course it's Sunday, so we're just going to relax here and answer a few questions. And thank you, by the way, for sending in all of the questions that you did throughout the week. That's the format of this show. You send in your questions throughout the week, and then at the end of the week, on the weekend, I answer them. And so, without further ado, let's get going. Oh, and before we do, just a reminder that if you're not familiar with this format, if you want to ask a question in the comments below, do so and use the hashtag #AskABrit. That way I can search for you and include your question in the episode next week. And so, without further ado, let's get going. So the first question comes from Daryl Cherry, who asks, is Washington on your bucket list? And he's talking about the state, not this nation's capital. It's a big bucket list, by the way. It's bigger than Craigslist, right? It's huge. And the top of that bucket list is, in fact, the city of Seattle, if we're talking about cities anyway. And so, in that regard, I think you'll find, Daryl, that yes, Washington is very, very high on my bucket list. Oh, next question comes from Emerald Leafeon. I think that's a Pokemon reference, isn't it? And they ask, have you ever gone out and seen a tank museum? I think we have, haven't we?
Probably.
We went to a military museum in Indiana. It was around Peru, I think it was. Peru, Indiana, not the nation.
That was an Air Force base.
It was an Air Force base, but it did include a few tanks within the museum. It wasn't specifically a tank museum, but nonetheless, I'd be very interested to go. Unless you're talking about fish tanks, in which case, again, bring it on. You know, my cats would definitely love that. All right, Tom Gray, who is a fellow Grimbarian, that means somebody who's from Grimsby, the town I'm from in the UK, and he says, or asks, have you ever found anywhere quite as good and as shit as the Barge? No, I haven't, in either case. So, the Barge it's an amazing place. It's where you go to drink, but it's on a sort of canal, as it were, in Grimsby, near the shopping district. And
I've thankfully never been.
You've never been. I'll take you one day. You'll be thanking me, and you'll be hating me.
I've seen it though.
Yeah, it's a sight to behold.
Bus station across the street.
It's a dive, but it's a very, very beautiful dive. All right, this question comes from a rather unpronounceable name, Cade ZZ, I believe. I'll go with that. Asks, I currently live in the UK. Are jobs better paying in America, and can you buy as much for your money as you could in the UK? Good question, and as is true in the UK versus London, which I recognise is part of the UK, but it's expensive. The same is true of certain places here. So New York City, San Francisco specifically, I hear is incredibly expensive to live. So no, in those terms, I would say no. It is not. It is not cheaper to live. But if you're looking in the middle of the country, for example, I lived in Indiana for 8 years. Yeah, the cost of living is. That was just to denote that it's much lower. Sorry. Should have just said it's lower. It is lower. CNN actually on their website has this great feature where you can put in what you earn now and compare it to what you would earn in each of these states. So hopefully, if I remember, I'll put a link to that in the description box below, and you can check that out. All right, next couple of questions come from Julia C. Thank you for these questions, Julia, and I particularly like this one. And you ask, so I know stereotyping a group or country is bad and you shouldn't do it. I disagree. I think you should absolutely do it. It's funny, just sometimes in private. I wouldn't ever do it in public. I'm probably about to do it in public. Sorry, carry on. If you had to pick one stereotype that people from other countries have about either the USA or the people in it that is actually true, which one would it be? That is a very good question. So Americans often get stereotyped as loud, right? And while I don't actually see this as being completely true across the board, I don't think that Americans are particularly louder than British people, especially if you're at the football terraces in the UK. They certainly out volumize, that's not a word, out decibelize. I'm making up words now just to get through this answer. They're louder than most of your American sportsgoers, I would say, just from experience. However, when you're in restaurants, I think there might be a clear winner here, and it's American. So I'll be sitting at a dinner table just quietly and very Britishly eating my dinner while minding my own business. And on the table next to me, there's a date going on. You can tell it's a date because the girl is sitting there very quiet while the guy speaks at 100 miles an hour at her about sales figures. and it's really embarrassing. But he's really loud about it in the whole restaurant he is. I think that sort of thing is culturally more prevalent here because there is just a different approach to, I think, eating in restaurants and conversing at the same time. And then Julia also asks, and she's a fellow Chicagoan, and she says, we love Portillo's, which I believe is a restaurant here in Chicago. And she says, my question is, have you been there yet? And if so, what did you think of it? No, and I don't know. Okay, the next question comes from Indy J, who wants to get my perspective on healthcare and coming from the NHS of the UK to now having to pay for healthcare and the process of getting it, how much it costs and how satisfactory you find it. Well, firstly, just to say that even on the NHS, we still have to pay, of course, because it goes through our taxes. But of course, we all chip in to that tax system and then have equal access to the NHS. And of course, we don't get a hefty bill at the end of it. I do miss that. I think a lot of British expats who come over, they say the two things they miss the most, the BBC and the NHS. So I do miss those. In fact, 3 years ago, nearly, over 2 years ago, Tara, my wife, actually went into cardiac arrest. We had to take her to hospital and we got a bill back later on for $119,000, which rather took us aback, obviously. We laughed, actually. I opened it. I was like, all right, how much do you think it'll be? 30,000, 40,000? Treble it. Oh, shit. All right, Julian Williams asks, thank you, Julian, have you ever gone on a float trip before? While you'll be in St. Louis during Memorial Weekend, I will be on the Merrimack River in a raft. I don't think I've been on a float trip. I assume it involves rafts. It sounds good, whatever it is. I love the idea of rafting in any way. Like I've said before, when we go to the Grand Canyon, I'm going kayaking for the first time. I've just sort of made that up in the last few weeks, but I'll do it. And capsize us both. What do you think about that, wife?
No capsizing allowed.
All right. Okay, and so moving on, this is a question that came in from Andrea's Life, and they ask, do most Brits think Americans are cowboys, i.e. reckless, rude, as portrayed in old British shows? We're doing a lot of stereotypes today. I like this. This is good. Let's keep it going. It's a good question. I do think a lot of British people have a view of Americans that there's this sort of brashness about them. If they still have it, I think that old John Wayne type stereotype has given way to Joey from Friends. All right, Firecracker 3240, you're up next, and you've been following me for a long time. I really enjoy our interactions in the comments, but finally I get to interact with you with my voice. So let's go. You ask, what is the biggest misconception you had about America before living here that surprised you when you got here? And is there anything that you didn't expect that totally took you by surprise, good or bad? Yeah, I think the biggest misconception I had, at the back of my mind, just thought everyone here is going to be really rich and own huge gardens with swimming pools that I can go swim in if I can, sweet talk my way into it. Rather understandably, of course, most people in the United States, just like the United Kingdom, aren't rich. And that's sort of at odds with how American television sort of presents things. You see things like Friends, where a bunch of them are living in this massive New York apartment, or Sex in the City, where Carrie Bradshaw is dating all of the rich men in town, and she herself, even as a writer in New York City, is not doing badly at all. We just assumed that the whole of America was kind of like that because that's what we're presented with. The thing that took me by surprise was the winter weather, because when I landed here, in fact, it was snowing, but it was also just a bit colder than I was used to. Didn't expect that. I honestly, truly did not know that the middle of America got that cold, or in the summer that it got that swelteringly hot. I'm sitting in my apartment right now in May, and I'm trying to get through the video because I'm dying of sweat. Sorry, that my voice goes a bit high pitched when the temperature and the climate are warm. All right, and sticking on the theme of stereotypes, Red Girls Rain asks, do you think the stereotype that Americans are conceited is true? I think that's sort of slightly different from brash, so we'll go with this one. And so I think the personality trait of being conceited is not necessarily completely exclusive to America. I've met Swedish people that are conceited. I don't want to just stick to Swedish. I'm not just attacking the Swedes here.
I mean, Swedish people.
On the whole, I do too. New Zealanders. I met somebody from Croatia once, from Zagreb, who was a right little you know, it doesn't. You can meet conceited people anywhere. I think that the stereotype for Americans just comes from this sense that we have about them as being super confident. Notice I said super there. I put an R in super. I'm turning, as somebody said in the comments, into a Yank. No, I've met a lot of Americans who are actually very self-deprecating, who are very humble and very quietly go about their business, unless they're in restaurants and they're on a bloody date. This next question was actually asked by two different people throughout the week, so I want to give a shout out to both of you, from Zanita and Harry the Lynx. And those two ask, have you ever been to other places in Europe besides the UK? Yes, I have. I have been to Spain 3 times. I went to Barcelona in 2001, and I've also been to Tenerife and Menorca. And oh gosh, not really. I think I may have gone to Paris when I was 2 months old. Funnily enough, I've said this before, that if I still lived in the UK, I'd be in France every weekend, you know, money permitting. Because when I lived there, it always seemed like France was far away, Belgium was far away, Croatia was, I was happy Croatia was far away after my meeting with that chap. Alright, my man James Harris in St. Louis asks, Sir Lawrence, oh yes, why do you think the Yanks confuse our accents with the Australians? I've encountered this on an almost daily basis. In your opinion, do you feel this is due to a lack of region accent exposure? I actually do. When we were growing up, James, you will recall, Sir James, can I call you Sir? James, you called me Sir. No, I'll call you Lord Harris. When we were growing up, we had TV shows like Dallas, Dynasty, you know, and all of the American films that I know that you're into and I'm into. We had all of the Australian soap operas, so Home and Away, Neighbours. We had this exposure to other accents, and so it was just sort of ingrained into us. I think America is, or at least was, bombarded with its own pop culture. So again, it got Dallas and Dynasty, but it also had so many American TV shows that it was inundated mostly with itself, and occasionally, of course, it would get access to British shows, to where, you know, keen people, like I suspect a lot of my subscribers actually, would have picked those things up. But yeah, I think it is. I think it might be sort of a lack of exposure to regional accents. So you hit the nail on the head, you know, with a big hammer. Alright, next question comes from Adam Manley, who asks, have you ever tried explaining rugby or cricket to Americans? Somebody needs to explain rugby and cricket to me first, because I still don't know the rules. Alright, Mr. Han Solo 79. I hope it's the real one. Hello Lawrence, my question is, what are the noticeable differences between dating American women and British women, and how do I bag myself a nice American woman? Thanks, Gavin, Berkshire, UK. First thing to do is to not use phrases like, how do I bag myself a nice American woman? Probably won't go down well. I don't think that women on the whole are receptive to questions that make it sound like you're going to perform an autopsy on them. But I will say this, that there are some differences. I think that American women, in fact no, American people, I would say, have that sort of more directness about them. So they'll tell it like it is, you know, men or women, and it sort of takes you aback at first because you're too busy sort of apologising needlessly for things that haven't happened yet. And they're already sort of planning for things that haven't happened yet, and the two marry in a kind of weird way. Get online, go to Tinder or whatever it is, and put in your profile and say, I will exclusively only date American women. Can you call me now? This is my phone. Don't put your phone number on there.
Never a good idea.
Yeah. I don't know, Gavin. I'm not a dating guru, I'm afraid. Send a carrier pigeon. That used to work.
To who, though?
To who? Is it somebody who likes pigeons, perhaps?
Not me, then.
Alright, the next couple of questions are from Elizabeth F. Hello Elizabeth, and you ask, was there any one particular thing about America that first drew your interest or a dream of moving here? At what age did you start becoming interested in America? Well, I've often said that this book is what drew me onto America. American Aerial View, stole that from a library when I was 12, but actually it started a lot earlier than that. So I grew up, of course, on American films. The Goonies, right? When I watched The Goonies as a child, I just wanted to live in those houses with the side wooden panels on them. Moved to America, sure enough, they exist everywhere, you know. And so I was just, I don't know, I was just fascinated because of that. I think Steven Spielberg helped to paint this picture of a magical place, but a very actual place. Like it felt real, you know, like in E.T. It was real people, real places, but there was an alien there, and now I'm the alien.
You're an alien. You're a
Legal alien, I'm an Englishman in Illinois. Next question comes from Zabina Zagetsky, who asks, how did you end up in America? What is your story? Well, here's the abbreviated version, Zabina. So in 2008, I was working for an arts club in West London. My wife had come to visit me, and we were looking to secure her visa to stay in the country. And then, because it was the height of the recession, I was laid off, and we then decided to put a halt to the visa process here for my wife in the UK. And then we moved to Anderson, Indiana to ride out the recession, which was an odd decision, but we did it anyway. We've stayed in Indiana for 8 years, and we then moved to Chicago. That's a really abbreviated version. There's a lot more to it than that. I think one day I will devote an entire video to it. Stay tuned, we will have more on that soon, and I'm hoping to do a video or two on the visa process itself, which is quite a kind of complex system, because there aren't just visas for married couples, but there are for students and for people who are coming here on business. So there are other things to look at and to consider. Alright, next question comes from Matt727, who asks, how can a Brit get US citizenship, and roughly how long does it take? Well, of course, this ties in a little bit with the last question, and we will be doing videos in the future on this very topic once I've researched it more, because frankly I don't know too much about the citizenship process. I do know that you have to be, on the whole, there are exceptions, you have to have lived as a resident in the United States for 5 years or more, and at that point you can then follow the steps to become a citizen. I would look at the USCIS website, because they have a lot of information around the kind of forms you have to fill out and all of that stuff, and it will also point you to the costs involved with becoming a citizen. Like I said, I will get back to you on that in a later video, so stay tuned for that. And the final question today comes from Roy Crampton, who asks, why do they call it the World Series when only the Americans take part? And of course that relates back to the video I did around sports, American sports here earlier this week. It's a good question, Roy. There's a few theories on this. A few people have thought in the past, some scholars, have tried to trace back the name of the World Series to the, I think it's the New York World newspaper. That they thought it might have been linked to that, but that's since been declared an urban legend of the time, and more likely the history is that early on it was initially known, the World Series, back in the 1800s, as like a US championship. It was named something along those lines, right? But a magazine at the time, I think, tried to hype up the series by saying, oh no, this is global, this is the world, you know, whoever wins is the world champion. And so it kind of stuck a little bit after that, so it became the World Championships of baseball, I think. I do want to point out that it isn't just American teams that take part. In fact, I think it was in the early 1990s, the Toronto Blue Jays won it twice, I think, in succession, which of course the Canadian team, but yes, granted, that does not by any means make it a world event, but it's not necessarily America trying to be arrogant. I think it was just a marketing ploy early on that just it got out of hand. It was a marketing ploy that got out of hand. And thank you again for tuning in to Ask a Brit. And again, if you have any questions, do leave those in the comments. And as I said before, use the hashtag #AskABrit. I'll be here all week, so you don't just have to ask them beneath this video. Ask them under any video throughout the week, and it will show up in my search. But until next week, have a great rest of your week. All right, bye. Did that bye sound a bit weird to you?
No,
oh, it's still
it was great.
rolling. Goodbye.